Hello and welcome everyone to day 39. On this day we're going to cover chapter 9. In chapter 9 we're going to devote most of our time to cellular respiration. And in this first podcast we're going to talk about objectives 1 and 2. In this podcast we'll talk about how photosynthesis is linked to respiration, and then we'll go into some of the basics of cellular respiration. And in the last podcast, over objectives 3 and 4, we'll go into more of the nitty-gritty behind cellular respiration. All right, well, let's go and get started. Oh, you may be wondering about this and this. Well, it seems I lost a bet over the weekend and had to shave. So I'll tell you more about that in class on Monday. All right, let's go ahead and get started then with objective 1. In this objective, we want to mainly kind of drive home the point that photosynthesis and respiration are intimately linked. So let's start this comparison by first talking about photosynthesis. The figure you may want to refer to is figure 9.2 in your textbook. But a couple problems with this figure, just so we don't get confused as we move along, is that it implies that photosynthesis only occurs in the chloroplast. This is mostly true because it does, of course, occur in the chloroplast in plants and some protists like the green algae. But remember, our good friends, the cyanobacteria, also undergo photosynthesis, but they're bacteria, so they don't have a chloroplast. Alright, but they still undergo photosynthesis. But most of the organisms that you're used to thinking about, plants and green algae, they would have the chloroplast. But don't forget about cyanobacteria. Very important bacterium that also undergoes photosynthesis in the absence of a chloroplast. Alright, now, photosynthesis, as we talked about last time, its two main outputs here are oxygen and organic molecules like glucose. These are now both taken up into the cellular respiration. Okay, which organisms undergo cellular respiration? Well, all of our eukaryotes do. So our animals, plants, protists, fungi, and remember also that some bacteria also undergo respiration. So I'm going to put aerobic bacteria and archaea. Have to abbreviate there. Don't forget about these. Sometimes, again, same problem we had with photosynthesis. Sometimes we think if an organism doesn't have a mitochondria, then it can't undergo cellular respiration. But our aerobic bacterium and archaea were the first to undergo respiration, so they certainly can do it. They just do it in the absence of a mitochondria. I also want to make a special note here about plants. Sometimes we mistakenly think plants undergo photosynthesis and animals undergo cellular respiration. This is wrong. For a couple reasons. One, cellular respiration isn't just for animals, it's for all of these organisms I just listed here. And the other thing is that plants not only undergo photosynthesis, but they also undergo respiration. They do both. They do it all. They're pretty cool. Now, the products of cellular respiration, we haven't talked about it yet. We kind of, a little bit last time when we talked about photosynthesis, but respiration is going to make two byproducts here, CO2 and water. I should also point out that it does make a lot of ATP, and it also generates heat. These byproducts of carbon dioxide and water, though, are critically important for photosynthesis. So the two, photosynthesis and cellular respiration, because of the reliance on byproducts from each other are linked. We should also indicate that light up here is important for photosynthesis. Okay, so that's objective 1. Yes, they are linked, and this is how they are linked. So let's define cellular respiration. Cellular respiration takes chemical energy, so let's write chemical energy here. Again, that's my symbol for energy. That is stored in organic molecules like glucose. And it transforms it into chemical energy stored in ATP. So that's our first point. So the second point is that we break down this organic material like glucose it's broken down into carbon dioxide that can be reused in our ecosystem, namely photosynthesis. And the last point we want to make, I'm going to try to squeeze down here, is cellular respiration occurs in all eukaryotic organisms. We listed them on the last whiteboard shot, but remember this is our plants, our animals, our protists, and our fungi. In addition, it also occurs in our aerobic bacteria. When we think of cellular respiration, we think of it as occurring in the mitochondria, and this is true for eukaryotes. So we should go ahead and draw a cross-section of a mitochondria. So if you chop the mitochondria in half, this is what you would see on the inside. You've probably seen this picture before, very similar to like this at some point in your life. Just to remind you though, this is our outer membrane. This is our inner membrane. Here, in between the outer and inner membrane is our inner membrane space. Inside of the inner membrane is called the matrix. These kind of finger-like projections of the inner membrane we call cristae. Within the matrix of the mitochondria, the citric acid cycle occurs, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You may have learned this in some other class as the Krebs cycle, or you may have heard it as the TCA cycle. Your book uses the citric acid cycle as the name, and it's probably the best name for it. The Krebs cycle and TCA are both kind of outdated terms, but just in case you've heard of them before, I didn't want you to be confused. On the inner membrane, oxidative phosphorylation occurs. And we'll talk about that on the next podcast too. And I just want to close with one misconception about the mitochondria. This won't be on your test, but this will make you appreciate how sometimes textbooks get things wrong. You've probably always heard that the shape of the mitochondria is kind of like bean shaped, something like that. It turns out all the textbooks have this wrong. Almost all of the textbooks have this wrong. Really, the mitochondria within a cell, so this is our cell here, the mitochondria forms these tubular structures. They don't look like a bean at all. They look like almost like giant tubules. Now you can wow people with that general piece of tidbit of information over Thanksgiving dinner. Alright, let's go and erase this. And let's write the general equation for cellular respiration. We have glucose. Glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. Plus oxygen. And to balance the equation, it turns out it has to be 6 oxygen molecules. And through cellular respiration, this is converted into 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters, plus ATP, plus a lot of ATP. The reactions that are on this line to do this, these are glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. And we're going to talk a lot more about these in the next podcast. But these are together what's going to be on this line here. Okay, with that, that ends our first podcast. We went over objectives 1 and 2. On the next podcast, we'll begin with objective 3. Let us know if you have any questions. Bye.